Today in the show, I have Imagineer Chris Runco joining me. Chris started his Disney career in Disneyland Park, but would go on to hold many different roles at Walt Disney Imagineering during his 46-year career. From the opening team of EPCOT to Shanghai Disneyland and so much in between, Chris shares stories about the creation and inspiration behind so many of your favorite Disney Parks attractions. Plus, Chris is responsible for creating not one, but two iconic animatronic figures in the Disney parks. Do you know which ones they are? You're about to find out. Enjoy my conversation with Imagineer Chris Runco.
Prepare for some insight. You've tuned in to an exclusive DCTC interview.
Hello, Chris, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
I am excited to talk to you about the many, many various projects that you've worked on. But before we get to all that, I want to know where it all started as far as your training in the arts and whether or not the arts was something that was a natural skill for you as a kid. Was it obvious that you were going to always kind of go into this field?
Yeah, I think some of this is genetic with people. My mother is an artist. She was an award-winning watercolor painter. Went to Chouinard Art School. Took some classes from some of the same folks that taught at the Disney studio. People like Don Graham. She had classes from him while he was teaching, or right after he'd been teaching at the studio. And my dad was a civil engineer and built things all the time. So when I was a kid, we did all kinds of construction projects, lots of carpentry and things. So I think I blended all those together. And she's also a collector. Some would say a hoarder. And there's artwork for myself and my brothers. There's a portrait I did of Abe Lincoln when I was in kindergarten, I think, that she kept. So, so I guess I was on that kind of track.
You know, what's so funny is your parents, with their two sets of skills, were kind of like that mix of Imagineering, the Imagine and the engineering.
Yeah.
And then they produced you. So you were born Imagineering, essentially.
No, I think that's right. I'm not the only one that had the good fortune to have that kind of background. But so they each, and I didn't know this till later. So I had art. I loved everything, science, math. I loved it all till I got to college and I tried calculus, and then I decided I didn't love math all that much. But all through school, I did all different kinds of art. And when I look back, the things I did in high school, to give you an idea, I said, okay, I did graphic arts in high school. I did theater design in high school. I designed sets for some of the high school shows. I designed floats for our high school that had special effects on them. Animation, like a big dragon that animated. I did, like I said, the theater designing sets, and we did projected sets. I built a flying saucer when I was in high school, an air cushion vehicle, just like the flying saucers at Disneyland. We built our own, my friends and I. And I looked at it and said, 20 years later, I looked at it and said, well, if I knew a kid who loved art and loved science and built things like that and drew like that and enjoyed art like that, where would I tell him was a good place to go work? So, yeah, I think I kind of was headed that direction. I didn't even know it.
Were you an arts major in college, or were you just kind of trying different things?
I was trying different things. And I went to a liberal arts college out in Claremont, and when I was a senior, the dean called me in and said, it's about time you picked a major since you're about to graduate. And we figured out that the classes I took, I had barely enough for an arts major. I had barely enough for a literature major. So we decided I would have an art and literature major. And so I was golden. So I took in some of each. I took art classes mostly at Scripps College. I was going to Claremont McKenna. And the Claremont colleges, you can take classes at all of them. So I had quite a few art classes, but it was a liberal arts education. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing that I did there that actually proved to be as valuable as anything was I was the editorial cartoonist for the Claremont paper, which meant I cranked out 2 and 3 cartoons a week. And again, in hindsight, I looked at it and said, that's where I learned to draw quickly and get it on, get a task down, that kind of thing.
So the first job that you had with Disney was actually in Disneyland Park, and this was in 1970, where you started as a portrait artist.
Yep.
Now, did you go into this job? First of all, I want to know kind of what that job entailed and where it was located, but also, did you go into it with the goal of getting to Imagineering at the time, Wet Enterprises at the time?
No, absolutely not. I had no idea there was a Wet Enterprises. When I told my art teacher in high school that I was interested in science and I was interested in art, he said, "Why don't you be a medical illustrator?" That was his best advice. So it shows you, there wasn't a perception that there was such a place. So I had no clue that there was such a place. I went to Disneyland just to get a summer job after my freshman year in college. And I applied to be a ride operator. I thought that sounded more fun than doing merchandise, and went in to do the interview. And the guy looked at me and said, "It says on your resume that you've done caricatures." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Can you do portraits?" I said, "Sure." So he called out the supervisor. He picked up the phone and called the supervisor from Art Festival. They called it. It was on Main Street at the time. And the guy came in and said, "Yeah, what I'll do is, here's the kind of chalk and here's the kind of paper we use. Why don't you go do some samples and bring them back to me?" And I went back to college and drew everybody in the dorm. And 2 weeks later came back and showed them to them. And he took one look and said, "When can you start?" And so that got me into being a portrait artist there. And it was much like when you go there now, there's the portrait artists in New Orleans Square. 2 or 3 of them, maybe max. We had 12 easels on Main Street on that little side street. There's a wonderful image I have, design sketch that I of Art Festival that was done by John Hench, and the original concept sketch. So one year when I was there, I went into John. We made a print of it, and I brought it into John and had him autograph it for me. That's where I worked for 4 years all through college.
Okay, so did you have other jobs at Disneyland, or did you transition from that job to Wet Enterprises?
No, I was there for 4 years. When I graduated, I became permanent part-time, they called it, which meant summers and and holidays, and a few hours during the week. And I worked there for about a year, and I just didn't have enough hours to, I wasn't getting enough making enough money, because I was only working like 8 hours a week, except for summers. So I went looking for other work. I actually set up and did portraits at an Aaron Brothers for a while on my own. But I love how analog this story is. So one day I'm walking out Harbor Gate, and we had the old time card machine where you stick your card in, and right next to it was the employee bulletin board with apartments for rent and cars and bikes for sale and all that jazz. And I found there was a 3x5 card there, and it said "Wanted model builder to build props for a Disney division." And so I took the number off the card and called those folks, and a few days later I was at an interview and showed them some of the things I'd drawn and that I'd built. I'd made my own animation table with the rotating animation disc, so I could use it for sketching. And I had paper mache, and then I had my drawings and things. And they hired me to be in their model shop, and this was a full-time job. And this was another little Disney company that was down there in Anaheim, and it was called McGlashan. And they made the shooting galleries, and they maintained them. So at the time the galleries were still lead shot, and they were just transitioning to electronic. And so we had a part of the company was literally folks making lead pellets. So I probably have a nice sizable amount of lead in my bloodstream. I worked there for a few years, and it was great because it was a very small department, just a handful of us, and we did everything. I mean, we built sets, we painted them, we did fiberglass work, molds, everything a model shop can do. And they had brought down 2 or 3 people from Imagineering to help them grow. into these electronic galleries. So I met one guy from the model shop, Sharansi Imopas is his name. We called him C. And Jim Elliott, who was running the carpenter shop at Imagineering. And so I got to meet these Imagineers and heard for the first time that there was such a place, which really intrigued me. That was a great experience working there.
Okay, so you went from building models for Disney with the intention of them being shot at to eventually transferring to Wet Enterprises.
Yeah, in fact, there's still several. The other thing we did was arcade games. Oh, the other thing that happened was Sam McKim at the time had done design for the new electronic galleries, and he also did designs for the arcade machines that used to be in in the little pirate shop and in Bear Country. He designed those machines, so they gave us old arcade machines, and then we would revise them to Sam's designs. We would build all the little props that go inside. We would renovate the electronics, and we would do the graphic design based on Sam's sketches. And there's some of those still around. Not long before I retired, I went in the model shop one day, and here was one of the machines I built. One of the arcade machines sitting there. What the heck is this doing here? It says, well, it's going on a tour to the Smithsonian. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they sent a bunch of Disney stuff around to one of these traveling shows. And one of them was this Pirate Shoot arcade game that I'd literally built all the props on it, this pirate flag on top and everything. So I have pictures of that. But so anyway, that's what I did there. And like I said, I got to know some Imagineers, and they told me, they said, we're gearing up for this new project called EPCOT, and they're hiring people. So you ought to go up and have get an interview. And so one day I carded myself up, I called up, got an interview, and went up, and I had the oddest interview you'd ever seen. I walked into the lobby at 1401 with my portfolio, which was basically a big box full of stuff. I hadn't gone to an art school, so I didn't have a really a clean setup. I just had thrown everything in a box, and the administrative assistant came out and said, "Oh yeah, right this way." And she walked me into what I found out later was Edie's conference room, the main conference room in the front of the building. And I walk into a room, and there's 12 guys around the table. I didn't know who they were, thank God, because it would have killed me. It would have fainted. Around the table was Marty Sklar, Claude Coates, Bill Martin, Orlando Ferrani, all these guys I would work with eventually. And they started pulling things out of the box and handing them around the table. And Marty in particular looked at a bunch of it, and they said, "Okay, thank you very much for coming," and walked out. And Sharansi caught me. Then he said, "Oh my gosh, I would have helped you get ready if I knew that's what they were going to do." But I walked out, and then, I kept waiting and waiting and, calling and calling just to keep in touch. And about 3 weeks later, they called me up and said, "We want you to come to the model shop. So when can you start?" And I transferred up there right away.
That's awesome. I love that. Now, you started in the model shop at Wet Enterprises, but you held a lot of different roles at Walt Disney Imagineering during your time there. We're going to kind of take a look at these roles through different projects that you worked on. One of the earliest ones for you, I believe, was Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So what was your position with that one?
That was so much fun. And I had the good fortune to land on that because that was working for Tony Baxter, who, as you know, is a Disney legend. Even more, he's a great friend and an amazing designer. In fact, he and I carpooled from Orange County for a while when I was first going to WDI. So I got to hear lots of good stories on the way up and down. But I was in the model shop. And one of the very first jobs I did was he had a model that exists till this day that he had supervised for Discovery Bay when he was going to when he planned a Discovery Bay land that went right back about where, kind of where Galaxy's Edge is now, with a bay and a big, beautiful Hyperion airship and things. And there was also a circus land attached to it. And Steve Kirk was working on that, and a lot of other people. Anyway, one of the first things I did was I made little Dumbos for a little tiny 1 inch equals 20 feet model. The whole Dumbo ride was probably 2 inches across, and I had to make little tiny wood elephants for it. I built this little tiny model of the Dumbo ride. Nowadays, you just go ask the guys in the laser lab to grow them for you, at any scale you wanted. But I whittled them out of, of geluton, which is a type of tropical hardwood, and made little cardboard ears. And so there's a little Dumbo ride that's like the first thing I touched at Imagineering. And then not long after that is when they had actually started a Walt Disney World model on Big Thunder, but they needed a Disneyland one. So I got in on literally I had to build the tables for that one and then start building model parts that went on top of it. And one really wonderful thing was Tony, he was really good at asking people just to contribute ideas and things. So one day, so I'm working on this model and I got to build, carve the rock work on this 1/4 inch to the foot model, sections of it. He had sculpted the mountain itself. And then I made castings of that with the help of the sculpture shop, Adolfo Procopio, working for Blaine Gibson. They taught me how to do molds, plaster molds, and we molded the mountain. And we, for this 1/4 inch model. And then I carved ancillary things like the smaller spiral butte, we call it, and the place where the dinosaur bones are, things like that. And he had me do some redesign on the load building. They had a much different load building than in Florida because of the way it was configured. And he didn't care for some parts of the design. And so he said, "Why don't you try some things?" So I designed some pieces like some shade structures and added props like chimneys and things and winch. And then he had the architects come down and take my models and draw them and add them to the architectural drawings.
Were you partially responsible for the famous dynamite goat as well?
Yeah, that's another thing. He came to me one day and said, we've got a bunch of these leftover animals from
Nature's Wonderland.
What can we do with them? So I just sketched out a bunch of little cartoons of different things. And one of them was this goat chewing the dynamite and the little dynamite shack with the skunks. And he loved it. So I got to make the model of it and stick it on the 1/4 inch model. And then they, we added that to what we were going to do. Plus we did like rattlesnakes and, several other critters along the way. But the main thing was the goat and the skunks. Yeah, I didn't know that was such a thing.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. Yeah, Kevin. One day, if the writer Kevin Lively, who was an Imagineer, he sat down the hall from me, and we got to be real good friends. And anyway, one day he's telling me stories, and I was telling him about Big Thunder. And he says, wait a second. He says, "You designed the goat?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Oh my God, do you know, we should go down and do the goat trick." And I went, "What's the goat trick?" And so he educated me on the fact that this goat was kind of a big deal. And so we went down to the goat trick, which I did my best, but I think it just made me dizzy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But anyway, the goats, that was fun to do. And the whole scene, I've got a little fun. And it's funny too, because it's basically about the size of a napkin sketch. This little marker sketch I did to do that.
That's so funny.
Yeah, that's how that started. So I got to do all kinds of things with that.
Alrighty, so you were doing that for Disneyland. You did say that one of the reasons that you were hired in the first place was that they were working on this big project called EPCOT.
Yep. Yeah.
Now with EPCOT, was it more concept art that you were doing or more model making or kind of a mix of everything? What was going on there for you?
This is where, I actually transitioned from the model shop to special effects during this.
Okay.
I was in the model shop. I actually worked on the model for World of Motion. I built little cars. We kit bashed cars and things. And I was working for Claude and for Ward Kimball, who were designing that. I was working on those models. I also worked on a model of the first land pavilion that Tony did. Tony was head of, which is gorgeous to this day. It's these big, beautiful crystals with these different biomes inside. Worked on pieces of that. And then in the middle of it, I was asked to, I should mention, this gave me my first chance in the model shop to be an art director. They sent me down to do a wet rehab of the subride. This is the first time they tried to, instead of draining all the water, doing all the work, and then putting the water back in, they said, let's see if we can save some money and we won't take the water out.
At Disneyland?
At Disneyland, yes.
Okay.
And so I was sent down as art director, and it was a bit of a fiasco in some ways. And I was working with Leota Toombs, who had done beautifully painted. They were trying a new type of fish. Instead of the fiberglass, they went to a ceramic one that they could, bake in. and she was painting them. So then she came down a lot to work with the paint shop on those things. So I did that job, which was amazing. I got to, I art directed from the sub and from a rowboat. I would row props out to the middle of the lagoon, like, seaweed and stuff. And then I'd pitch it over the side, all hooked onto weights. And then I'd go arm wave and say, okay, tell the divers, this is where you put it, And then we went in the sub. This is all an experiment because they'd never done it this way before. They'd go park the sub somewhere, and I would go out, sail, row myself out, get in the submarine, sit there and look out the window, and then arm wave from the windows, to the divers, say or I do a little sketch and say, here's the rock, right here, put the fish, the 3 fish, like right here on this. And they'd nod, and then they go over and they drill underwater and they glue these things. Yeah, we spent like 6 months underwater there doing that. And I got to walk the sub ride, which very few people have done. They put me in a wetsuit one day, and I got to walk with them in my scuba gear and walk around the thing.
That's cool. Was that before or during EPCOT? What was going on?
The EPCOT design was going on. This was contingent with me working on these models of EPCOT pavilions.
Gotcha.
But then in the middle of that, Bob Sewell came to me one day and said, the special effects guys are shorthanded and they need somebody to build mock-ups for them. And I'd like you to volunteer. So I happily volunteered, and I went over and started working with Bill Novy and Mark Fuller, who were now running the newly begun special effects department. It had dwindled down to like 2 or 3 people, and now it was supposed to grow again. And they brought in Bill Novy and Mark Fuller, who now owns Wet Enterprises. But they ran special effects. And I was building mock-ups for them, and I built mock-ups we would literally build like a full-size mock-up, or usually of a scene or an element of the ride, of the different attractions, the special effects. I also built fog boxes for the Matterhorn. It's when we first put fog in a Disney attraction, and I built the first fog boxes that Bill Novy designed.
Oh, man.
And he and Mark actually built that. Anyway, so I was working in there. After about 6 months in there, Bill came to me and said, we'd really like you to stay. Would you like to stay in special effects? And I said, okay, sounds good to me.
Were you enjoying that more than model making?
Oh, it was all, I loved it all. I mean, It was fun. Well, it was really fun because instead of the small scale stuff, now we were building full size pieces.
Yeah.
And secondly, they got me, they got a kick out of having an artist in the bunch. For the most part, I mean, they're very creative, of course, and they're very, very visual, but they didn't. Very few of those guys knew how to draw. It wasn't their thing. They were basically engineers and scientists, and they, like the things that Yale Gracie did. Yale Gracie, of course, was an artist and the special effects design. These guys, this is another generation, so they actually all had a lot of mechanical training and engineering training to do their job. Lasers and special projection systems and that kind of thing. So they got a kick out of having an artist in the bunch. And I got a kick out of working with them because I loved the science of it too. And I became kind of the go-to guy for projections. I mean, Yale taught me how to do projections, like the ones in the Haunted Mansion, how to use the 10 by 10 projectors and create the artwork and use the mirror balls and all the devices we used at the time. Things that nowadays you just created on video and project it someplace, but we did them with projectors.
So in the original EPCOT park, Epcot Center, what were some of you touched? World of Motion, you mentioned. You had something to do with the original Land Pavilion, Spaceship Earth, I believe, correct?
Right.
What else? What other projects did you touch in that OG park?
Yeah, what we did was we kind of, between all this, we ended up, special effects ended up growing to about 150 people.
Wow.
In the course of that project. And we all had pieces of it. Like I said, I was kind of a projection guy. So I did projections of mammoths and cavemen for Spaceship Earth. Mm-hmm. I did projections of confetti and then a lot of other things, fire in American Adventure. And in Land, I helped. Yale started those, working on those, and then I picked up some of those. So I bounced around from pavilion to pavilion, focusing mostly on projected things. But the other thing I did was every one of us took an assignment of being overall special effects supervisor for one pavilion. So mine was American Adventure. So I
Oh, wow.
We all designed different pieces, but then I had the job to get it all installed and tuned up in the American Adventure route.
Oh, I'm obsessed with American Adventure.
Have you ever been staged to see the mechanism backstage?
I've been under the stage before. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
it's one of the best shows in Epcot or anywhere.
I mean, I genuinely say this all the time. I have a theater background and a great love for theater. And I say the American Adventure, although there are no live actors on stage, it is one of the best stage productions ever produced. Like, it's a phenomenal show. Having gone under that stage, it is mind blowing to see the grid of animatronics, and it's stunning. But I am super curious, given that you worked so much in projection. This is back in the early 80s. What do you think of the crazy projection mapping technology that we have today?
Oh, I love projection mapping. I've done a little bit of it myself, and I plan to do more. I remember seeing the mock-ups. I think the first time we really got into it heavily was as they were mocking up the Runaway Railway, Mickey's Runaway Railway. I saw those mock-ups, and I actually helped work on some. I'd call it mock-ups of the effect. We did like an Indiana Jones scene with like waterfalls, projected waterfalls, and having the head turn from stone to gold and things like this. And we were showing off what projection mapping could do. And after that, they did several other pieces. They did a special effects, did a show of Jack Sparrow in Florida for a while,
Yep.
which was phenomenal. And just the possibilities are endless. There's some, and I love the fact that, I mean, the best special effects are the ones you don't know are special effects. And the fact is
Exactly.
now you can do some projected things that you have no idea it's a two-dimensional thing if you stage it right.
Now, in the mid 80s, in 1986, you're at WED Enterprises, but at this point, WED Enterprises becomes Walt Disney Imagineering. This was a Michael Eisner change. And I'm just kind of curious. I'm always fascinated with people who were there at that time. What did you think of this? Did it feel like a change within the company, or was it just like, nah, our names just changed? I'm always curious what people think of this.
Basically, it was a name change or a structural change. Okay. In some ways, it didn't affect the day-to-day work that we had. It was more about the organization itself. The bigger change, of course, was the fact that we've been saved by Roy Disney. I remember, we were there and we had shrunk after Epcot. Went through these hellacious layoffs, and we ended up down. We'd gone from over 2,000 people down to like 600 again. And a lot of friends had left, and it was the morale was pretty poor. And then there was all the business about the company, getting sold and broken up. Various investors were trying to do to it. And then, Roy Disney and the Bass brothers brought in Michael and Frank, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells. And I'll never forget the first day they came out. I mean, literally, we found out about it in the news. The next morning at 9:00, they said, come out to the patio. We came out there, and Frank and Michael were there, and both talked about how excited they were to be part of Disney. And it was actually their first stop. They said, we're going to the studio next, but we wanted to come see Imagineering because you guys we have so much in mind for what we can do together, And so about that time, I think we'd all thought, well, maybe it's time to go. And I remember thinking, well, I guess I'll stay for a while and see what happens. So that was the big change. And then what it was, it wasn't that much after that, probably within a year, that they made this change. What they were really doing is, you remember the history of WED is that it started off as Walt's little place to work on this park aside from the corporation. So he could really go in and mess with it and play with it and with the team of people he had there very personally. But, I just read Rolly Crump's book, where he said to Walt one day, he says, why don't you have an office here? You love coming over. He says, no, I don't, Rolly, I don't come over here to work. I come over here to play. I don't need an office.
Yeah.
So that was its history. When I started there, it was still kind of a larger version of that mom and pop outfit, arm's length connection to the studio. And what they did was just make it legally, like another division of the company. So there were ways that the management changed, but for our day-to-day work, it really didn't change.
A little earlier, we talked about how you were a big part of creating the iconic dynamite goat for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. But it gets even bigger when we start talking about Star Tours and a little guy named Rex.
Yeah.
He's your baby.
Yeah. It was so special to be a part of that. Yet, to go back, I remember the day people came into the model shop and said, "You got to go see Star Wars. It's the greatest thing ever," and going to see it for the first time in Culver City, one big theater. And I will never forget the moment, because we knew nothing about it. The moment those ships come over your head, the credits, and then those ships come over your head. The gasp in the audience was unforgettable, because this big spaceship comes over, and then the humongous thing comes over your head, and the whole room shaking. And it's like the gasp was just, people practically fell out of their chairs. So we were all great Star Wars fans. And one day, we found out that we knew that people were working on ideas about how we could do something with George Lucas, and we found out he was coming. And of course, we were just so excited. So it was supposed to be one of these these evening meetings where he didn't show up till 5:30 or 6, and so we were all working late and lurking in the halls, hoping for a glimpse of George. I went back in the model shop and then came back a couple times, nobody there. Went back in the model shop, came out, and he'd gone. He'd been there and gone, but they just broken up. And Tony came out from the meeting, and he was so excited. He said, "George really loves the idea of the simulator used for a Star Tours attraction, and we think it'd be fantastic. He loves a combination, so we're off and running." But one of the things George suggested, and Tony held up this little napkin sketch, in red pen. And it was something George had drawn. He says he wants to make the thing more dimensional. So he wants to put a pilot into it. It's like a robot out there that's piloting it, and that'll make the whole experience more dimensional. And I said, "Well, that sounds great." He says, "So why don't you, you and we'll get a few people to look at that and see what they can do with it."
That's actually a really smart note from a man who doesn't build themed park attractions.
Oh, yeah.
From George Lucas to think, I think this would sell better to have like a pilot in the ride vehicle. It's actually really smart. I didn't realize, I'd never heard that was his idea.
Yeah, that was his. And I wish we knew. I asked Tony, we don't know what happened to that sketch. It would be priceless now. It was like a figure thing. It was just this little, here's the screen, here's the seats, and here's this little pilot up here, in front. I go, "Oh, I loved it, And so I started working on it. I should mention, that reminds me that one of the things I did at that point when things were kind of slow was they asked for designs for a walk around character at EPCOT. So I designed some walk around robots, and one looked a little bit, it was like a tripod with a rolling head with kind of this extension on it. It looked like a desk lamp. Does that sound familiar? And but I designed several. We actually did an experiment down there. We had this little one that bounced around, where we'd taken a commercial one and decorate, given him his own Disney costume. Anyway, I think that's part of what put it in Tony's head that, hey, ask Chris about robot design. And robot arms were all the rage at the time. We'd done Bob Rogers and the guys had done the Bird and Robot show, which was a huge hit at EPCOT, and we just loved what robot arms were capable of doing, and how he got character out of a robot arm. That was fantastic. So anyway, that was before. So anyway, this moment comes up, and I grabbed it and I started sketching like crazy. And then I remember getting sick, a very inopportune time, and being at home in bed sketching these little robot sketches. So about a week later, I brought him to Tony and I gave him this handful of sketches. And a few days later, he came out in the model shop and grabbed me and he said, "Chris, they want to build your robot. They really like your version of the robot." And I practically fell out, just passed out on the floor. Like, I get to do a Star Wars thing. It was so exciting.
I mean, and Rex has become so iconic. I mean, just the voice work of Paul Rubens, and like when it was announced that Star Tours was closing and Rex would not be the pilot, like there was a reaction from fans. And so they made sure to put him in the queue at the very least. And now the fact that he lives on in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, like it's really remarkable.
Yeah, it's, I was just working on a character. I loved robotics. I loved, and I was a cartoonist. You think again about that, it was kind of there's so much that happens. I love the word serendipity. And in fact, I I remember seeing a quote where Walt talks about serendipity as, how we work. I love that word. And I have to say, there's many times in my life and in my career where I was in the right place to do a certain thing, and I've seen that with a lot of different people. Walt was so good at casting people. I've read it a couple times. Rolly Crump said he was the best casting, or maybe it was Marty said he was the best casting director ever because he knew people could do things before they knew it themselves. So,
Yeah. Now, what was your title then when it came to Star Tours? What was your, because you had gone from model shop to special effects to...
I was still in special effects.
Oh,
So I was
interesting.
a special effects designer. So I guess he's a special effect.
All right,
No.
fair enough.
Yeah, because that was one aspect of the work at Imagineering that was really nice is we were not pigeonholed. And a lot of people did things where they just did them, like I'm a model builder, but Tony looked at, and said, what about these characters? Can you think of some interesting ways to do those? And got to create some Disney characters with it, one of them being a goat. So it's just fortuitous, and I suppose it's meant to be in some ways. The years later, when we were a year away from the opening Galaxy's Edge, I was at an event, and Tom Fitzgerald came up to me, which is, you remember, he wrote Star Tours, right? He was the head writer for that. And he came up to me and said, Chris, we just did a presentation on Galaxy's Edge for all the executives and then the employees at Disneyland. And he said, the only time we got like a standing ovation was when we mentioned Rex was going to be in Galaxy's Edge. And I laughed. I said, Tom, I guess we did something right, didn't we?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and Tom, I asked Tony, Tom is the one who cast Paul Rubens for that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I found out later, a very interesting note. I went to see a presentation with Daryl Van Sitters and several of the guys who had been on the original design of the movie Roger Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And they had originally thought in their concept, then after they developed it, then it was handed over to Spielberg and Zemeckis, and they went off another direction. But their idea was to use Paul Rubens for Roger Rabbit in that the original initial idea of the movie. And they said the reason was he had this wonderful childlike quality and this great kind of rebellious spirit at the same time. They'd literally gone and seen him at the Groundlings, and they said, this guy would be perfect for that. And I heard those guys describe this cast, this reason that, he would have made a perfect Roger Rabbit for their movie, their version of it. And I thought, well, that's exactly why he made such a good Rex. Because it's this childlike wonder and fun combined with a little bit of sassiness, and it's, anyway, I'm not describing it as well as it can be, but you just have to think Paul Rubens. And so again, what a beautiful choice that they made for the voice. And by the way, the toy has his voice. I have the little roll around the radio control version. I actually have two, so my grandkids can beat up one of them and I can have the other one in good shape. And I talk to him in the morning. I'll go in and say, good morning, Rex. And he'll say, here we go indoor. Oh, I'm sorry. And somebody told me they had Paul Rubens in to work on the show. And he told them, yeah, I'm doing some stuff for consumer products too. But so I've got a Rex that talks like Rex sitting in the front room. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Anyway, happy combination of a lot of things. Randy Bright too. Don't want to forget to bring him up because he came into my career. He was a mentor for me, and he's the one that first went over to London. They were doing a recording for a show, and while he was there, he went to see the Rediffusion company and saw this simulator. And he's the one that came back and went to Tony and said, Tony, this might be perfect for that. Because they talked about a Star Wars roller coaster. And decided that had some real limitations. And this came along and they put their heads together and the rest is history.
Very cool. Let's move on a couple years where we get to Typhoon Lagoon, which you cannot tell me at this point you're still in special effects. What is your title for Typhoon Lagoon?
Let's see. I don't actually remember at the point that they changed my title, because what that amounted to basically was somebody come out and say, hey, here's your new timesheet, and you see you've got a new number on the top sheet. Or, having your review and you go, see at the top now, it doesn't say special effects designer. I think it said show designer. then. I think that was what we called ourselves at the time. So, it was what had happened is after Star Tours, I'd gotten to do a lot more show design. I actually I worked on the special effects for the castle in Tokyo. That was a little bit of the last special effects project I did. And I was working on these robot designs at the same time. So I was getting more and more assignments to come into brainstorming and sketch up things for shows. And one day I was asked to go, and the meeting was all about Disney World had come up with, they knew they needed a new water park because River Country was so packed. River Country was the first themed water park anywhere. And it was a heck of a lot of fun. I loved River Country. Anyway, that was sold out all summer. At 11 a.m. they'd close it because it was packed. Say, we got to build another water park. So they'd worked up the basic plan of a water park and even had a name. Somebody come up with the name Typhoon Lagoon, but they didn't know what it was. And at some point, Imagineering got into it. This is one of those that started in Florida, and then with the hotel group, and then, we had dropped in our laps, and we all went in, a bunch of us, and they said, here's the deal. Here's the basic layout, water park, and we got this name everybody really likes. Go off and see what you can do. And so I went off, and I same thing. I was back at home sketching in my garage one night, and I'm doing a bunch of thumbnails, and I thought, well, what says there's been a huge typhoon that's come through? And I said, well, I could put a boat in a tree. That usually tells people, and I drew a sketch of a big banyan tree with this, fishing boat stuck on the top, or more like pleasure boat. And then I did a couple more, and I finally settled on, let's stick them on a mountain. Just a little biblical overtone to that, I suppose. But anyway, and the mountain had a big hole in it too, where slides went through. So I did some sketches of that. And one of them was a mountain with slides coming down every direction and a riverboat on top, paddle boat with a big stern wheel. So we all came back, put those up. There was somebody done a version of a Mayan temple. I'm not quite sure why. Somebody did a version of a lumber mill, which makes sense, all the sluice boxes and stuff. Somebody done a World War II bivouac, like it was kind of Bermuda Triangle theme. And I had my sketches of this thing with the sketches of like the boat on the mountain and buildings that had half leaned over and had stuff crashed into them and stuff like that. And Randy Bright and Marty walked into the room, and Randy took a look around, and he took one look at that boat on the mountain, and he came right over to it, and he started talking about it. He said, wow, with this, you could do this, and you could do this, and you could do this. And he took one quick glance at the others, and that was it. He was sure that was the way to go, was the boat on the mountain. And so we started rolling from there. And we worked up, started with models. And I think actually it's during that process where they said, okay, you're now officially show design. Yeah. And then they like moved me to another cubicle or something. But for a while, I was just sitting in my cubicle in the model shop doing that job. Like I said, kind of a fluidity about jobs around there, which was cool because it enabled people to kind of pop out and grow, in different directions. I think was an attribute at that time. So that became Typhoon Lagoon. I wish we'd built one on the West Coast. I would have been in it every day. I loved floating around and going down the slides. I was not a big fan of Humunga Cowabunga, one of Kevin Rafferty's gems. Oh, Kevin Rafferty, also a amazing character, and I've worked with him many times. I worked with him many times, and that was when he moved from doing scope to writing scopes for the different projects to doing show design, was at that period of time. So he ended up doing the nomenclature for most of it.
I was gonna say, yeah, I interviewed him, and I remember talking to him about he did a lot of the puns and stuff, right?
The park. That's his forte. He does know how to talk without throwing a pun in. So yeah, I'm happy to say I threw in a few myself. I think I did Sternburner and Rudder Buster, but I can't remember for sure because we were just throwing stuff around. When he came up with Humunga Cowabunga, I said, what? what is that supposed to? And anyway, but it's I love it as a name. But I remember going to the top one day and going, oh my God, I guess I better slide down this thing. And I was petrified. And I think about that time, some little like 8-year-old danced up in front of me and went poosh right down. Went, okay, if an 8-year-old can do it, I have to do it too. So I did it.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Okay, let's fast forward a bunch of years to Disney California Adventure, where you were working on Grizzly River Run and Grizzly Peak. And the reason I love this so much is because when that park first opened, Like Grizzly Peak was kind of an icon for that park. It was used in a lot of the iconography and such.
Yeah.
And like that had to be pretty darn cool to be working on. And then I'm sure you didn't know it at the time, but then eventually you see, hey, this is kind of the icon for the park. Like that's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't start out that way. It was just, we actually started it out, again, we all had different, I actually worked on the Westcott thing. I worked on the Long Beach.
Oh, wow.
I actually worked on the Long Beach thing where we were going to build a theme park next to the Queen Mary.
Okay, that's a whole other podcast episode. Will you please come back and no, sincerely, like, will you come back and talk about Westcott and the Long Beach thing?
So the Long Beach thing became Westcott, and then Westcott fizzled out, and then they said, okay, California Adventure, and so I forgot I was working on something else, and I know I was working on Animal Kingdom, and I knew I couldn't really. I had to hand off to somebody to art direct in the field. I loved working on Animal Kingdom with Joe Rohde and the gang, Kelly Ford and the whole wonderful gang. But I needed a new project, and they said, well, they put me on California Adventure, and there were two pieces: this kind of wilderness area and the animation show. So I started working on both, and eventually it got too big, so I ended up just focusing on the Grizzly Peak area. But what I designed for animation was I did this theater where you walk in and you see this huge animation board, which we still have. You go in there and learn how to draw, and you learn about animation. So that was my little piece for that. But I was working on Grizzly Peak, and we started out with the idea this was going to be a dry for wet slide. The slides that you've probably seen at other theme parks where you climb on a raft and you're in your street clothes, but it's on a raft that's in like an inch of water, and you slide down. They're fun. They're a lot of fun. But my first version of the mountain was doing that. Was a couple of those coming out of a hill. It was much smaller than what it is now. And at some point, we decided, what would be a lot more fun is let's go for the raft ride thing. Let's see about incorporating a raft ride into a mountain. And I tried a bunch of different things, but it stuck. This idea of a mountain that looked like a bear. I always loved, there was that great granite face in Maine, and there's other rock formations that people have always seen things in. I actually did that in Big Thunder. For Florida, I created a whole rockwork thing that was a Native American chief, and he was part of the rockwork thing. And I had also done, in hindsight, I look back and said, well, one of the ideas, we worked up water park designs for Europe, and one water park design we did had a dinosaur theme, like it was a dinosaur excavation, and I made a mountain that looked like a triceratops out of stone, but I didn't think of that at the time. It's just this bear idea popped out, and afterwards I went back and said, I guess I was kind of channeling that when I worked up that idea. And everybody seemed to really like the bear idea for the thing, so we started working that up. And then we also did the play area, the challenge trail. I love doing that. I love Tom Sawyer Island, and we were getting to build our own Tom Sawyer Island, really. And then the stores. And I have to say the other thing, again, lucky timing or whatever. From the time I was small, our vacations used to be to go drive up in our station wagon up into the Sierras and go camping and to Yosemite. And I'm not kidding, like every summer, that was our thing. And we ended up with a team that 3 of the key people on the team all had that experience where we grew up going to the mountains all the time and to the Sierras. So everything about Grizzly Peak is based on kind of our real from childhood experience of going to those mountains and what it's like. And not only the mountains, but like the redwoods, the Russian River Outfitters there's a building it's kind of based on that's up along the Redwood Coast. I have a bunch of reference photos of buildings I took. We went to mines in Gold Country, and we went to to Yosemite, and we went to the Redwoods, and we brought back props and all kinds of things. But that's the heart of where that experience started.
You mentioned your love of Tom Sawyer Island, so I want to touch a moment. I know we're running a little short on time here, but I want to touch a moment on Pirate's Lair, which overtook Tom Sawyer Island, or I guess it's Pirate's Lair on Tom Sawyer Island.
No way we were going to eliminate Tom Sawyer Island. We were going to make it better. No, I loved working on that. I grew up playing on that, like so many people have, and I brought my kids over there, and they played on it. And one of these days, I still haven't done it. My grandkids are about the age now I need to get them over there, but My grandkids will play on it too. So we love that. And it had frankly gotten in disrepair. In fact, I helped work on a kind of a renovation of it, a rehab of it a couple of years earlier. And the Disneyland management at the time came to us at some point and said, we want more people drawn over to that side of the park. Everybody's over with Space Mountain and all, and the park's a little imbalanced. And secondly, we got these pirate movies coming out. Is there anything you could do to wrap these together? And we said, well, sure. And the key thing was, I would tell people over and over again, I went back to the book. I went back to Tom Sawyer. And if you read the story, and think about it, the rafts always had the pirate flag on them. And the reason for that is because it comes from the book, because Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn and Joe Harper, not Admiral Joe Fowler, Joe Harper, in the book, the reason they run away from home and go to an island in the middle of the Mississippi is to be pirates. And we had these wonderful quotes when they're over there looking for treasure and skeletons and stuff. And Ray Spencer and I partnered on that. We came up with a scheme to do an overlay of the island. And they looked at it and said, well, this is great, but frankly, we don't have the budget right now. It doesn't fit into our 5 or 10 year plan. So never mind. I went, okay, fine. And my boss told me, yeah, that's never going to happen. Just put the stuff away and, get rid of it. I didn't, because I'm a pack rat. So I kept those presentation boards stacked in my office. And about a year later, we got this panicky call going, hey, Jay Rizzullo says he wants something to open. He wants a pirate thing to open on Tom Sawyer Island, day and date with the movie. And that's only like 9 months away. Have you got anything left? I go, well, as a matter of fact, I think we got something for you. So we got to dust off the boards, and Ray and I got them out, and we presented again. And this time they went, okay. And Jay Rizzullo was there. He practically had the checkbook in his hand going, okay, how much you need to do that? Can you have it there by May? Okay. And we did one of the fastest projects imagined. I think we scared the heck out of like the whole architectural engineering department, because we went, yeah, we're going to do the whole thing in 9 months. People just said, how are we going to do this? And we got out there and started charging away, and we had to do it. Like I said, for Imagineering, that's a quick project. It went literally, in fact, they just told us to start rolling. The day we showed it to Jay and he gave us a verbal approval, they just said, start designing, get this thing built. Yeah, it was fun. And we were out there, we were charging ahead. And then we were out there opening day to watch people come out there and enjoy it. And a really interesting thing is I had talk about fans. We're all, Disney employees are Disney fans, right? The day we closed the island down to do construction, so the raft comes over to bring like 10 of us over to the island to start surveying. And the ride operator is kind of glowering at me. And I said, what's up? And he says, and it's just like he just kind of poured out of me. He says, how dare you touch Tom Sawyer Island? Walt Disney himself worked on this. There's some things around this park we should keep. And I looked at him, I said, I can't remember his name, but I just said, look, you're looking at some of the biggest Disney fans, and we all grew up with this thing too. We love it. We're going to make sure that what comes out, what happens, is absolutely something Walt would love and absolutely something that will fit completely with Tom Sawyer Island. So he quieted down and he took us across the island, So, and anyway, after we opened it, I literally had some of those same ops people come up and say, man, you really blended that well. That fits so well with this. So I said, well, go read the book.
Very, very cool. Now we touched on a bunch of your projects. There are obviously a bunch more, but I'm going to start winding things down here. And I'm curious, is there anything that you worked on that you feel like was one of the most innovative things that you worked on? Something that you feel changed the industry in some way?
Ooh, should have given me more warning on that one. Let's see. Let me think about it. Well, EPCOT, everything we were doing in EPCOT was using the latest technology. We had to literally go grab technology. We used, especially that's one of the aspects of special effects. I remember designing things for World of Motion with electrofluorescent panels that they were using for dashboards. My friend Tom LeDuc, who is a longtime special effects designer and everything else, he used to say our strong suit is we misapply technology. And so we were out gathering technology. Everybody in the company was. And so we threw tons of stuff into for the first time to do that, to do EPCOT. And that's what's part of what it was there for, to be a place to innovate. And the other one I'd mention real quick is just the drop on the end of Grizzly River Run, that spiral drop, nobody had ever dropped a wrap before. That had never gone down a drop. And our engineer, Mark Sumner, who actually is the same engineer who invented the soaring flying system, and he and I laid out that ride, and I had this idea of a big spiral drop, and there's pictures of it, sketches of this whole thing where you would go down this spiral, spinning all the way. And we decided and then there was a straight drop at the back of the mountain. We did a full-size mock-up up at our Tahunga facility. And one day he came to me and said, we got a problem. I said, what is it? He said, we don't have enough height to do the spiral drop. We need 50 feet. We only have about 25. And that's from our mock-up. And so we went up to the mock-up and we rode it. And I said, Mark, is there some way we can make this thing spin? Because just a straight drop, even though we've invented it for the first time, you've come up with a way to do this. I really want to get that spin in it. And he said, I got an idea. And he walked up to the top of the lift, and we pulled the raft up there. It was all manual. And he got us in the raft, and then he strapped himself in, and he put some leather gloves on his hands, and he grabbed the tow rope. He said, okay, cut it loose. And they cut it loose. The thing went down, and he yanked on that rope as hard as he could, and the raft spun all the way down the drop. And we're at the bottom going, woohoo, this is so much fun. Do it again. And he goes, I'll try. And so we did it about 3 times. He said, that's all I can do. And I said, can we figure out a way to do that every time? He says, we'll work on it. And so, the rest is history. He and his cohorts invented a way to make that. I call it a half Sumner. When you go down, you do a half Sumner spinning on the way down. But that was something we invented. And it was, him inventing the whole drop system for a raft. And that raft technology had been around a long time. But he invented a new way to do it. And to this day, I think somebody's finally made a drop somewhere back east. So that combination of Imagineering, to sit there down there and the engineers going, we got a challenge here in front of us. It's a problem. No problems. Challenges. How are we going to do it? And we sat down and I was sketching something. I think it was in a meeting, and I was literally sketching. And I sketched something about an over and under. He says, that could work. That could work. That's Imagineering. That's my favorite part of Imagineering, that combination.
That's very cool. Now, you were there during numerous different Disney executive teams, and I'm curious, was there a certain team of executives and CEOs and such that made life more fun, or were you just kind of felt more proud of the work that you were doing at Walt Disney Imagineering?
That's great. I'm glad you didn't ask me about the ones I didn't care for. I didn't want, wouldn't want to go through that history. No, we had a bunch of great executives. I mean, Marty was such a touchstone. He was always there.
But I mean, even above the Imagineering, I mean more like the Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, the Bob Igers, the Bob Chapeks. Like, you've worked with a lot of folks.
Let's see. Well, Marty and John Hench were running it, but we always have. If you think about it, it's a fairly flat organizational structure. I mean, I would report to somebody who ran a project. They would report to Marty, who would report to Bob Iger, or before that, to Card Walker, right? And Card was such a huge supporter of everything. So we, and I mean, literally, we would be the ones up there in front of Card, or Michael Eisner, or Frank Wells, or Iger, showing them the stuff. So that's a pretty flat system, which is nice that we had that kind of communication going on. Michael was amazing. Coming in, he always wanted to plus things. He always wanted to make it better. And he had that real enthusiasm, especially early on. And Iger, Bob Iger, I was always so impressed with his enthusiasm and if you think of how much somebody like that is taking in a day, all the meetings they're going to on all the projects, film and TV and consumer products and everything else, and go through meeting after meeting, and then, and still be able to find their way through and make decisions. I always remember one little anecdote. We did Monsters, Inc., the renovation down there in Anaheim, and we had it ready to show him. And he showed up one day with the entourage of executives. Matt Wiemat, I think, would have been there at the time. And we started telling him about that we were going to take him on the ride. And he says, he told the show producer, Jody McLaughlin, wonderful show producer. He said, Jody, wait a second. says, you told me there were things you were doing in the land here to prepare for the ride, about the way it was going to, the layout was going to work differently, and the approach to the different. Can you tell me about that first? So she stopped and she went through that before we took him in the ride. And I thought, wow, this guy remembers from 6 months ago all the details of the logic for why we were going to change the layout of the land. And he wants to know about that detail, you know? And I saw that on Shanghai too, where we're showing him models, and he right away picked out things that said, wait a second, I don't remember why you put that there. Won't that be a show problem for you? And we, he just really had an amazing ability to spot stuff and catch it. And again, you always had this great sense of him, this tremendous enthusiasm for what we did. So that's probably the two that pop out at me, is their support and their encouragement over the years.
That's awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much. That was so much information, and I can just tell by your stories there's so much more. So I hope to have you back on sometime to talk even more. Thank you so much. And is there any place that people can find you? Are you on social media or anything?
I've got an Instagram page where kind of relating Disney memories, and Chris Runco 52. CHRISRUNCO 52. And there will be a web page. I'm rebooting it again because I didn't like the first version. So in the near future, there will be a chrisruncodesign.com out there, but it's not there now.
Alrighty. Well, people listening in the future, go check out that website. And Chris, thank you so much. This has been a blast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun for me. I have a lot of wonderful memories of these things, and I am still trying to, do a little magic now. So, and also such wonderful friends. I'm so lucky to have spent those years at absolutely magnificent place, working with the original Imagineers. I treasure every moment of that, right through to the latest Imagineers, and helping them get on their way. So glad to be here and glad to talk about it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast, on your favorite podcast app, where episodes are available 24/7. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Disney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain access to extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, unreleased episodes, and more bonus content. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description. And thank you for considering. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!